Wait, antivirus on Linux in 2026. Do you actually need it anymore, or is it just a leftover habit from Windows thinking? In the next few minutes, we're going to unpack something that most people get completely wrong, even in 2026, and by the end of this, you'll know exactly whether something like Kaspersky on Linux is useful, a necessary, or sometimes even a bad idea. So let's start with the reality check. Linux has changed a lot, and so has the threat landscape. Back in the early days, Linux users loved to say Linux doesn't get viruses, but that was never entirely true. What was true is that Linux simply wasn't a big target, and its architecture made widespread malware harder to execute. Fast forward to 2026, and Linux is everywhere. It runs servers, cloud infrastructure, developer machines, Android devices, and increasingly even everyday desktops. With the rise of distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch, and Linux Mint becoming more polished and user-friendly, more people than ever are using Linux as their daily operating system. And naturally, that raises the question: if Linux is more popular now, shouldn't it need antivirus software just like Windows? That's where tools like Kaspersky come in. Kaspersky, a well-known name in the antivirus world, has offered Linux support for years, mostly focused on servers and enterprise environments. In 2026, it still exists, still gets updates, and still promises protection. But here's the twist: for most regular Linux desktop users, installing something like Kaspersky is not only unnecessary, it often doesn't even address the real risks. To understand why, we need to look at how Linux actually works under the hood. Linux is built around a strong permission model. Unlike Windows, where historically users operated with administrative privileges more often than they should, Linux separates normal user actions from system-level actions very strictly. If a malicious program tries to install itself system-wide, it usually needs root access. And getting root access requires either the user explicitly granting it, or exploiting a vulnerability that's not already patched. And that brings us to another key advantage: package management. In Linux, most software is installed through official repositories using package managers like apt, DNF, or pacman. These repositories are maintained by trusted maintainers and often cryptographically signed. So, instead of downloading random.exe files from the internet, users install software from curated sources. This drastically reduces the chance of accidentally installing malware. Now think about it from a practical perspective. A typical Linux user installs a browser, some development tools, maybe a media player, all from official repos. They update their system regularly with a single command or click. There's no constant hunting for drivers, no shady download websites, no bundled installers trying to sneak in unwanted software. That entire ecosystem already eliminates a massive percentage of the attack vectors that antivirus software is designed to handle. So where does Kaspersky fit into this picture? On Linux, Kaspersky is primarily designed for detecting threats that might pass through a Linux system, not necessarily threats targeting Linux itself. For example, if you're running a mail server or file server, your Linux machine could be hosting or transferring infected files that target Windows users. In that case, Kaspersky acts more like a filter, scanning files to protect other systems. This is where the misunderstanding happens. People install antivirus on Linux thinking it will protect their own system in the same way it does on Windows. But in reality, most Linux-targeted malware doesn't behave like traditional viruses. It's not about random downloads infecting your system instantly. It's about very specific attack scenarios, like compromised SSH access, misconfigured servers, or running untrusted scripts with elevated privileges. Let's make this clearer with an example. Imagine you download a random script from GitHub and run it with sudo without reading it. No antivirus is going to save you there. You've already given it full control. That's not a virus problem. That's a trust and behavior problem. On Linux, user behavior plays a much bigger role than antivirus detection. Another example is browser-based attacks. In 2026, most attacks are happening inside the browser: phishing sites, malicious extensions, fake downloads. Antivirus software on Linux doesn't necessarily protect you from entering your password on a fake login page, or installing a compromised browser extension. Those threats exist regardless of your operating system. Now let's talk about performance and philosophy. One of the reasons people switch to Linux is to escape the heavy background processes and system overhead common in Windows. Antivirus software, including Kaspersky, often runs real-time scanning, background services, and frequent updates. On a Linux system, this can feel unnecessary and even intrusive, especially when the system is already designed to minimize risk. There's also the open source mindset. Many Linux users prefer transparency and control over their systems. Kaspersky is proprietary software, it's closed source, which means users have to trust it blindly in some regions and communities. There are also concerns about data privacy and telemetry. While these concerns vary depending on perspective, they add another layer to the decision. Now, this doesn't mean antivirus on Linux is completely useless. There are scenarios where it absolutely makes sense. For example, enterprise environments. If you're managing a company network where Linux servers interact with Windows clients, antivirus becomes important for compliance and security hygiene. Similarly, if you're running a file server, email server, or hosting environment, scanning files for malware protects users who rely on your system. Another use case is dual boot systems or shared environments. If your Linux machine frequently handles files that will be used on Windows systems, having antivirus can act as an additional safety net. It's not protecting Linux as much as it's protecting the ecosystem around it. Let's visualize this with a scenario. Imagine a small office where a Linux server stores shared files. Employees using Windows PCs upload and download documents daily. One infected file could spread across multiple machines. In this case, running Kaspersky on the Linux server helps detect and block threats before they reach other devices. That's where it shines. But if you're a typical home user running Ubuntu or Fedora, browsing the web, watching videos, coding, and installing software from official repositories, the chances of getting infected in a traditional sense are extremely low. Your biggest risks are phishing, weak passwords, outdated software, and misconfiguration. Antivirus doesn't solve those problems. Another important shift in 2026 is the rise of containerization and sandboxing. Technologies like Flatpak, Snap, and Docker isolate applications from the rest of the system. Even if an app is compromised, its ability to affect the system is limited. This adds another layer of protection that reduces the need for traditional antivirus. And then there's SELinux and Uparmor. These are security frameworks built into Linux that enforce strict policies on what applications can do. While they can be complex, they provide powerful protection against unauthorized behavior. Again, this is built-in security, not something you need to install separately. Now let's address the psychological aspect. Many users feel uncomfortable not having antivirus because they've been conditioned to think it's essential. On Windows, that makes sense. On Linux, it's more about understanding the system and adopting good practices. It's a mindset shift from reactive security to proactive security. Instead of relying on antivirus, Linux users focus on things like keeping the system updated, using strong passwords, enabling firewalls, and being cautious about what they run. It's less about scanning for threats and more about preventing them in the first place. Here's another example to make it clearer. Think of Windows security as having a guard who constantly checks everyone entering your house. Linux security is more like having strong locks, secure doors, and only letting trusted people in. Antivirus is the guard. Linux reduces the need for that guard by making the house harder to break into. That said, Linux is not invincible. There are vulnerabilities, there are exploits, and there are targeted attacks. But these are usually aimed at specific high-value targets like servers or organizations, not random home users. And when vulnerabilities are discovered, the open-source community often responds with patches and updates. So where does this leave us in 2026? Kaspersky on Linux is still relevant, but its role is different. It's not your primary defense. It's a specialized tool for specific scenarios. For most users, it's simply not necessary. Let's add a visual idea here. Imagine a split screen. On one side, a Windows PC with multiple antivirus alerts, background scans, and update notifications. On the other side, a Linux desktop quietly running updates through a package manager, with minimal interruptions. This contrast highlights the difference in approach. Another visual could show a flow diagram. A user downloads software. On Windows, it goes through multiple risk points like third-party websites and installers. On Linux, it comes directly from a trusted repository. Fewer steps, fewer risks. And one more example, a user receives a phishing email. Both Windows and Linux users are equally vulnerable if they click the link and enter their credentials. This shows that some threats are platform-independent and require user awareness rather than software solutions. As we wrap this up, the key takeaway is simple but important. Antivirus like Kaspersky is not a must-have on Linux in 2026 for most people. Linux's design, combined with modern security practices, already provides strong protection. Installing antivirus doesn't hurt in many cases, but it often doesn't add meaningful value either. What matters more is how you use your system. Keep it updated. Install software from trusted sources, avoid running unknown scripts with elevated privileges, and stay aware of online threats. These habits will protect you far more effectively than any antivirus. So the next time someone asks if they need antivirus on Linux, the answer isn't just yes or no. It depends on how they use their system. For servers and enterprise environments, yes, it can be useful. For everyday desktop users, it's mostly unnecessary. And that's the hidden truth. Linux didn't eliminate the need for security. It changed how security works. And once you understand that, you realize that antivirus is no longer the center of the conversation.